again. I'm so happy of all the responses I got. They're so positive, and it really makes me want to go back and finish writing all the rest of the stories that I haven't done. So today, this is going to be a very short one. I think it's only going to be about 5 minutes. The title of this story is called Teddy's Eyes. The only thing we can do is climb on the roof. My mother said there's nothing else that we can do. I didn't think it would get this bad, but I walked down to the road and we're totally cut off. The water is coming up on that side too. There's no way out. All we can do is pack up some of our clothes and put them up high, but we'll need a ladder. I found one in the back in the shed, and when the water gets into the house, we'll get on the roof. Somebody will come and rescue us. They know we're here. And I thought, oh, it's a good thing my mother knows about this, because we're all by ourselves and it's dark and I'm really scared. But she held my hand and I felt safe. She could always do that to me. The war had destroyed our home, and the government had passed an emergency law which allowed people like us to live in someone's weekend cottage. It was far from ideal, but it gave us a roof over our head, one room, no electricity, no heat, but there was water from a well and a small iron stove, which would provide some heat whenever my mother was able to maybe get a few pieces of wood or coal. And that also allowed us to cook. The weather had been bitterly cold, but my mother had met a Canadian soldier. My father was somewhere missing in the war. He was stationed in northern Germany, and he gave her a blanket for us. He was a kind-looking tall man, and in my memory, he was always the person who had brought us the remains of a birthday cake, which had provided us delicious food for several days. So I was very fond of this tall Canadian. This had been one of the worst winters, with heavy snowfall, and now, as the snows were melting, the threat of floods had turned into cruel reality. As we were preparing to climb on the roof, my most important thought was my Teddy. This was a huge teddy bear that my father had gotten when he was a little boy, and I loved that bear, and he had made it through the war, which was unusual. And this keepsake was one of the things that we had been able to salvage through the war. Teddy was my constant companion. This was the connection to my father, whom I had not met yet. I knew Teddy obviously long before my dad entered my life. My father was still in the war. Many a night, Teddy and I were snuggled up together in the air raid shelter during World War II, waiting for a better day. So to me, he was the safe companion. My mother helped me on the roof and told me to wrap up in the blanket, and she snuggled up next to me and held on to me, and she said, "Don't move, you might fall down." She followed with a few clothes, a candle, and a blanket for herself. It soon would be dark and would get very cold. We were huddled up on the roof, Mama, Teddy, and I. It seemed scary in the dark, but Mama assured me that everything would turn out all right. Someone was bound to come for us and rescue us. We must have been there until midnight. The water by now was almost up to the roof. Off in the distance was a large searchlight, and just as Mama had predicted, a rowboat was coming in our direction. One of the men in the boat said, "Oh, sorry, we couldn't get to you sooner. How old is that cute little girl? What, like 4, maybe 5? I thought so. I have one that age. Let's get her in the boat first." As they helped me off the roof, I got into the boat all right, but Teddy didn't quite make it, and he slipped into the water. After our few belongings and my mother were in the boat, the man who had told my mother earlier that he also had a little girl suggested that we better find Teddy because I was inconsolable. I could not stop crying. Teddy was drowning. He was a sad sight indeed. After they got him out of the water, he was soaking wet, covered with twigs, and he was covered in mud. It took my mother repeated attempts to clean Teddy up for the next few months. I remember that it took weeks and weeks of putting him in the summer sun and sitting him next to the little stove to dry him out. He had survived, but his beautiful golden glass eyes with the little black centers were missing. They had fallen out. There were just holes, and his nose looked like it had been eaten by something. He was indeed a sad sight. The flood had been in May and was just a faint memory now. It was Christmas Eve, and the little house smelled wonderful. There was a tiny Christmas tree on the table with garlands cut out of paper, a few candles and some ornaments made out of yarn, a gingerbread house with cotton candy on top of the chimney sat next to the tree, and that was the sweet smell I had noticed. There was a crackling fire in the little stove, and the ice flowers on the windows made the room appear magical to me. My mother put some pine cones and branches on the crackling fire. I saw a plate of brightly colored cookies, and there was a pair of hand-knitted gloves. And I thought, wow, I wonder whether they're for me. Teddy sat with his black eyes and a new nose. I jumped up and down and squealed with delight. Look, Mama, look, Teddy has eyes. I ran over and gave him a big hug. My mother had gotten some black yarn and stitched large round eyes where the glass ones had fallen out. To me, he was the most beautiful Teddy in the world. Mama, Teddy, and I sat down on the floor in our scratchy green army blanket close to the fire. My mother handed me a cup of milk and a small cookie. Between the hot drink, the fire in the stove, the smell of the gingerbread, Teddy's total recovery. Wrapped up in that scratchy blanket, it was warm and cozy, and I soon went to sleep. The year was 1946, and amidst the destruction and heartbreak of post-war Germany, my mother had been able to create a safe and cozy place, sheltered from the harshness of the world around us. I felt happy, warm, and above all, loved. I'm sorry. Thank you. See you soon.